today, I thought it would be nice to do a spiritual life reality check. What can we expect to accomplish spiritually in this lifetime? And in order to do this, I think we have to start with what is a reality check? What is reality? The average person on the planet today would tell you that reality is you got to eat. You got to have a job and make money. You have to take responsibility for your life and get down into the nitty-gritty, get real. And that the people who seek spiritual advancement are people who are trying to get away from reality. They're trying to get out of all of the very real challenges of daily life. Yes. And so you have to understand, what do you mean by the word reality? To the worldly man, reality is the world. But to the spiritual person, reality is Satchidananda. Reality is God's presence everywhere. Now, the thing is that it's much easier for us to experience worldly reality than it is to experience divine reality. And so we have a bit of a tug of war, because in our consciousness, the world is more real to us than God. And even still, in the beginning on the spiritual life, some people, they have an interest, or they want to know if God is real. They become interested, but they're not sure. And many people live their whole life being quite dedicated to their religion, but they never have an experience, what you would describe as a real personal experience, which to them has proven the reality of God's presence. So, if we want to have a spiritual life reality check, we have to have a spiritual experience. And this is why yoga is a science, because it's not just about what we believe. If a person has not had that experience where they have been touched by, they have perceived some amount of God presence, then they're unsure. And some religions in the world will tell you, well, you just have to have faith. You have to just believe it's true, and then when you die, you'll find out. But the yogi doesn't say that. The yogi says that no, if something is real right here and right now, you should be able to perceive it. And then, of course, we have a very specific system of techniques and the lifestyle that goes with it in order to have that experience if you haven't yet had it, and to deepen it if you've had some of it. And the first place to jump off here is to ask yourself, have you had an experience of God presence that has convinced you that God is real? If you've had that experience, then, and the interesting thing is, it doesn't take much. When your heart has been touched, when you see an infant, your infant child, and you meeting it for the first time, and in most relationships, it takes a little time. I'll get to know you to decide whether I'm going to love you or not. But when you have felt God's touch, there's no question in your mind. When you see that infant, there's no question in your mind. I love this. I love this being. This is my own. When you have felt God's touch in your heart, then you know that God is your own, and you know that you are God's own. But for most of us, that experience is just a little bit. It's a little bit of God's presence. So, we come onto the spiritual life. Some people have more dramatic experiences than others. But you have something, you might have just the desire to have the experience. You say, well, I haven't had any experience, but I just instinctively know it must be true. There must be something here. And besides, you have to take into account that what is the alternative? The alternative is doing the same old things that don't work. And most people will stay there and say, well, this is all there is. But adventurous souls throughout history have sought to go places that others have not gone before. And spiritually speaking, we have to be adventurers. Yoganandaji even said that one of the great things that holds people back spiritually is their spiritual unadventurousness. They aren't willing, they're not open to the possibility. They close themselves off. And isn't it common that even your loved ones will, when you express interest in the spiritual life, will say, well, okay, but get real. Yes? How many great dreamers ended up being that their dreams were not just dreams, they were realities? Mankind dreamt that he could fly. Who would have thought? Today, people are literally flying. I mean, I don't mean in airplanes. I don't mean in helicopters. I don't mean floating up in balloons. I mean, they put on these little suits, these little wing suits, and they literally launch themselves and they fly like flying chipmunks, like flying squirrels. And they fly. And there's all other kinds of ways that people are flying. There's these new water jet packs where you put on this pack and the water stream and you fly. And of course, hang gliders and ultralight airplanes. People are flying all over the place. But what about those people who say, if God meant you to fly, you'd have wings? God gave us wings in the form of these ideas that we have to manifest in our lives. In other words, we have to make these higher potentials a reality in our life. And that's what makes it real. Or that's what brings, I should say it differently, that's what brings that reality into manifestation. It was already a potential. Gravity existed before it was discovered. All of the scientific laws were there before people figured out that they were there. God has been there before people figured out that God was there. Well, one of the things that convinces people to become interested in the spiritual life is the life of the masters. And the way that they live, and especially the things that they do. And as Yoganandaji wrote in the very beginning of the autobiography of a yogi, he said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said basically, unless people see miracles, they don't believe. Because they're so caught in the outward physical plane as being the reality, they can't believe in something greater until you do something that they can't explain. And then they might kill you thinking that you're evil. Or in some cases they may become inspired and recognize that there's some higher potential. And so the masters do all of the miracles that we know, walking on water, living without eating, without breathing for extended periods of time, raising the dead, healing the sick. So many things that get people all excited. But I'll tell you a miracle that's greater than all of those. It's a very practical matter for us, and connected to the reality check of our lives right here, right now. When I came onto the spiritual path, I read Autobiography of a Yogi. I was seeking. The universe responded. I read Autobiography of a Yogi. And I had heard of meditation. In fact, I had been initiated into transcendental meditation when I was 15. But there was no real philosophical understanding, and there was no God connection. So I read Autobiography of a Yogi, and of course I began trying to meditate, but when I would sit to meditate, nothing would happen. And I perceived very clear, it was clear in my mind at that time that to perceive God, I needed to meditate. I needed to perceive God through inside and not outside. So I wandered around for a few years trying to do that, and took the SRF lessons, eventually got Kriya from SRF, but it really wasn't until I came to Ananda and met Kriyanandaji, and most importantly, was in an environment that supported my spiritual aspirations. And yesterday we had this fabulous satsang with Nayaswami's Jyotish and Devi, and there was something that I think it was Devi who mentioned this. The atmosphere of Ananda, the atmosphere that I found when I came there, the atmosphere that we lived in. Yes, we talked about meditation and we practiced meditation, but this can be one of the traps of the Raja Yogi, is thinking that you are not going to experience God until you've meditated deeply enough. When we were around Kriyanandaji, and through over time, through our association with him, we gradually began to experience this when we weren't in his physical presence. That in each and every moment, when we were with him, suddenly regular life became magnetized and dynamically, spiritually vibrant. And in that vibrancy, we experienced happiness. We were just happy to be there. It had nothing to do with whether we were meditating in that moment or not. It just to be there, just to be in it. And this is a very practical reality of the spiritual life, is to get away from the idea, yes, the deeper you meditate, good. But to get away from the idea that I'm only close to God when I'm meditating. Well, I'm only experiencing God's presence when I'm in the most uplifted state of mind. Well, let me change the way it was coming out. The way to experience an uplifted state of mind is not only in meditation. Yes, it is the refining zone. It cooks us. It deepens us. But when we were around Swamiji, all you had to do was see him. You didn't even have to be next to him. And there was something that happened. Something happened, and your inner sense of connectedness to spiritual truth was opened. That door, something like opening a window and the breeze coming in. And before the window was open, you're thinking, well, life is kind of stuffy. But you open the window, the fresh air comes in. Oh, but it was always out. It was always available. That fresh air was there, but you had trouble accessing it. When we touch a spiritually magnetic, energized environment, then we begin to live not in samadhi, but in that magnetized environment. And that in itself can give you a sense of well-being that makes, that literally no outward experience can touch. Most people live for outward excitement and the seeking of avoiding suffering of any kind. But Yoganandaji, his first book, The Science of Religion, which Swamiji edited and represented as God is for everyone. The basic precept is that we are driven to seek happiness and to avoid suffering. We have to understand that happiness is the reality, and excitements that distract us from the fact that we're not happy, but that engage us, and that we think that that's happiness. That is not happiness. Happiness is a attunement to the natural upwelling consciousness of divine bliss that is our true nature. And the accessibility of that inward connection is not only in meditation, yes, a powerful tool, but we've got to stop thinking that it's only there. And when we do that, what we need to do is be around the magnetic vibration of that inward connection. This is really what we call, when we talk about satsang, we're talking about fellowship with that truth. When a meeting is successful, when you achieve satsang, you feel that touch. You feel that inward connection. It's a dynamic presence, and it is the source of well-being and happiness. And when we spend time in that, we get used to it. We realize that, yes, this is the experience. We keep thinking, I need a miracle. This is a miracle. It's a miracle that I felt happy sometimes. Because I lived in these ups and downs. I was, an angry young man. I was angry at the world for me not being as happy as I wanted to be. For the world, false advertising. The world gives false advertising. If a company did that, you'd be very upset with them. You advertised the perfect item, and it wasn't perfect. That's false advertising. So in the world reality, the reality that most people live in is false advertising. That you can somehow be happy. But once you've experienced this inner happiness, then you and touched it in that vibrant environment, and then beginning Ananda was a place. In fact, you could go so far as to say in the beginning Ananda was sitting next to Swamiji. Really. But then that ability to touch the incredibly exhilarating potential of spiritual reality began to grow in us. And we that barrier, thinking that we couldn't yet be happy because we weren't in samadhi, began to dissolve. And we began to realize that, well, I'm happy right here, right now. When I was sitting down and listening to Swamiji talk, I really didn't need God in that moment. You know what I mean? I was happy. I was not, when I used to go surfing, and one of the things I liked about surfing was that you go out on the water and you're floating around between the waves, and you're not thinking of any of your problems in life. It's like all of your challenges in life, they're gone. So you can be at peace. You can be, in a state of calmness that you're not used to. But in surfing, and that calmness is really, it's real, it's a reality, but it's not as deep as deep meditation. But it's the beginning of the awareness that you can withdraw yourself from that fake reality and enter into this more real reality. When I was with Swamiji, I began to more than the it's almost like we talk about peace and calmness as in the attributes of God. That calmness is more a little more passive, where peace is a little more passive and calmness is very active. And so the peace that I experienced when I was floating out on the ocean was more passive. But when I was with Swamiji, it was really active. It was really a dynamic awareness, and it was incredibly exciting. And not outwardly exciting, but inwardly thrilling. And this is one of the attributes of spiritual experience, is it's thrilling, but it's thrilling to the soul. It's not outwardly. There's no corresponding depression. As time went by, we began to experience that satsang, that presence, that you could say it, that spiritual family feeling, but it was deeply rooted for each person according to the depth of their meditation and their openness to feeling it. Not everybody who came to Ananda stayed or felt it ever. Not everybody who came to Mount Washington with Yoganandaji felt it and stayed. You really have to be interested and then open. But it became stronger and stronger. And eventually the idea of what Ananda was began to become bigger. That it's like getting fire. And the first fire, the central fire, and then you take a spark of it and you carry it, and you have to keep it, protect it, feed it, grow it. And if you don't care for it, that flame goes out. And then, of course, then you come back and you get new. And we often do this. We talk about when you get your recharging, your energizing spiritually in the Sangha, and then you go out into daily life and for an hour a day, a week, a month, or a year, and you notice that if you're not sufficiently keeping it tended properly, it will diminish. But you need to get back before it completely goes out, or you may not get back until some later time. Gradually, though, what happens is you begin to feel this connection to the original fire, and that you realize that the source of that inspiration is not only there, but that there is here too. And then you begin to practice. We call one of the ways we describe this is practicing the presence of God. In the beginning, we don't feel all of omnipresent spirit, but we feel a spark of it. And then we have to practice it, we have to tend it. So what we experienced was that feeling of satsang, that feeling of fellowship in spirit. And it was so fascinating. Kriyanandaji he had a very magnetic personality, but at the same time, he always emphasized God and Guru, not himself. So it was never his intention to make us like him. The goal wasn't that we should worship him, that we should think that he was the source. And this is our teaching, Sanatana Dharma, is that infinite reality is the reality. You go not to the Guru, you go through the Guru. We don't go to prayers, we go through prayers. we go past the thinking, we go past feeling, and we expand in that omnipresence, center everywhere experience. So Ananda became not just sitting at Swami's feet or being in the community, but a reality inside your own heart. And then you carry that connection with you wherever you go. And then you begin to realize that the same openness and perception that you experience in the Sangha can be experienced everywhere. So let's say you're at a meeting at work, and you're thinking, well, these are a bunch of worldly people. They're arguing about, who did the best job, or who should get the most money, or whose fault is it that something went wrong, not theirs. And you're thinking, well, where's God? You have to realize that God is everywhere. God is present in that moment. Maybe not, if you look at nature, you look at flowers, you have to admit, in terms of general levels of beauty, some are more beautiful than others. You could say that all of life is beautiful in its own way. Okay? So, these people who are yelling, they're beautiful in their own way. And their own way is not yet connected to God's highest way. They're more connected to God's, in the world way. They are stuck in the outward world reality instead of the inner omnipresent spirit reality. But what do you think they're trying to do there? They're trying to connect in their own way. They're on the journey. Everybody's on the same journey. So when we talk about what can we expect in life, we can expect to be around a lot of people who aren't going consciously in the same direction we're going. But they're still coming. And if you were, imagine if you were on, one of these, on a yatra, and you're on pilgrimage, trekking up to Amarnath Cave or any one of the other shrines in the mountains, and everybody's going at a different speed, but everybody's trying to get there. Some of the people are not going to make it. They're going to stumble, they'll injure themselves, they'll become ill, distracted, who knows, a lot of different ways. Some people, they're walking really slow, doing a lot of resting. Others they are just, pushing forward. Some people are being lifted by others and carried up the hill. All different kinds of combinations, but the goal is to get up there. The interesting thing is that when you get to the pilgrimage spot, then what do people do? So many people have been touched by God, and they know it. And then they turn away from it. They do not enter into it. And they go, okay, I know that's there, fine. And I'm going back to the real world. That's a choice, and that's fine. But when we talk about our expectations, we have to realize that our expectations determine, to a very large degree, what we actually experience. And when you have expectations about something, then you're open. You're open to that expectation. You expect it. So there's no resistance, or at least less resistance to it. And because you expect it, you step forward towards it. You put energy in that direction. Where if you have no expectations, you're more likely just to sit in your seat and to put your feet up. But if you expect to have a good time, there's a much greater chance that you will have a good time when you do anything in life. If you expect to see God in daily life, you're much more likely to perceive some of it than if you don't expect to. Oftentimes we live our lives not expecting to see God. Well, I haven't had samadhi, I can't see God. I'm not meditating as much as I should. I haven't done this or that, haven't eaten the right food. You know, a lot of people think that if they eat the right food, they're going to see God. Well, if they expect to, maybe it'll help. But it's that expectation more than the diet itself. The reality check is that your expectations drive a lot about what you actually can accomplish. If you expect to feel more of God's presence in your life, if you expect to see underneath the surface of everybody's outward self and begin to perceive the underlying inner self, then you will. There's a much greater percentage chance that you will. And if we spend time with others who have the same expectations, that God, not just that God will be present, but that God is present. And when you spend time with others who have that interest and magnetic, energized level of participation, then that magnetism rubs off. And in that, we find that we are more able to achieve our expectations, and simultaneously, just like you would if you were on that pilgrimage and you saw somebody stumble, you would reach down and try to help them in any way that you could. And this is what's constantly happening in our spiritual family, is we're helping each other. We're helping each other to stay focused and energized and magnetized so that we can carry in our hearts an ever-increasing flame of connection to God and Gurus. Our expectation should be that God is present. And our expectation should be that God will help me, guide me, inspire me, touch me in the best possible way in every moment. The only if in that statement is if I'm open, if I'm interested, if my attention is in that direction. If we turn our attention elsewhere, then can we say that God isn't present? Or can we say that we weren't present? And this is really the key. I love that example that Jyotish shared yesterday about the devotee who read the autobiography of a yogi and felt that Master was his guru, but then heard that shortly thereafter, before he could go to the ashram, that Yoganandaji had passed. And he then came to this satsang with Swami Ramdas and said, was inspired, and said, "Sir, will you be my guru?" He said, "No, your guru is Yogananda." And the disciple said, "Well, Yogananda's dead." And Swami Ramdas looked and says, No. You are dead. Yogananda's alive. Yogananda is alive. You're dead. How are we dead? Because we think our reality is out there. We think that the reality check is the physical world that we live in. Yogananda is one with God. Yogananda is a particular expression of God. God is always present. God has to be. God is by definition always present. We need to expect that presence to be dynamic in our consciousness. Then we can become more alive. More alive means more happy. More connected to God's basic consciousness of Ananda. This is, we have such a perfect family name because this is the definition not only of where we want to go, but the way that we live today. That when we come together in Ananda, we experience that reality. And no, not all of it, but an ever-growing amount of it. We have to expect it. We have to open ourselves up to it. So when you think about what you can accomplish in this lifetime, spiritually, open up your expectations. The practical truth is you don't know. But you do know that if you limit your perception of that possibility, there's a greater chance that will be the reality. Expect God to be present. Live in that consciousness. Yes, Lord, I know you're here. I'm expecting you just to touch me any moment now. You're delayed, okay, but I know you're going to come soon. I'm waiting for you. Can you imagine, think about this. Think about, I don't know exactly how this works in Indian culture. It must be the same, but I don't think it, as American, but I don't know how it looks outwardly. Teenagers get crushes. You know what I mean? It's like you see somebody, you feel magnetically attracted to them, and you start thinking about them. And they're in your mind all the time. Now, in Indian culture, there's not as much opportunity to spend time with that person. So there's more distance in it. In America, there's more opportunity to at least try to be around that person. But the fact is that if you had a crush on someone, you have this really intense interest, and then you hear that they're coming to visit, that they're on their way, and you're at home, and man, you're like, you have this expectation. It's like, oh yeah, they're coming. This is how we should feel about God. And we begin to realize that in that very expectation, God is present. And this is, in so many ways, the purpose of life. Yes, we could say the ultimate purpose of life is our immersion back into the ocean of divine consciousness. But that's sort of the end of the purpose. The real purpose is for us to be going, oh yeah, Lord. That's really God's purpose, is that we should be devotees, that we should love God. In spite of not God being fully aware in our consciousness, we give ourselves in that way to God. This is our purpose. We have to think not so much of the end goal being samadhi, but in the end, the real end goal is this. Oh Lord, I'm with you. Because that inevitably leads to the resolution in God's time. And that God wants us to savor that. That we, yes, how can infinite bliss be any better than infinite bliss? We often have this conversation about, well, why, if God is already so happy, why does God need to make the creation and the illusion of suffering and adventures? But the Kriyanandaji talked about it in terms of God's nature is also ever new creativity. I don't know quite what to do with that. When I'm feeling in delusion, I'm thinking God really made a mistake making the creation. But when I'm feeling this, when I'm feeling this love, this connectedness, this anticipation, and the knowledge that even in that anticipation is connectedness, that God is present there. And that when you give yourself to that, regardless of what life looks like on the outside, then the greatest happiness, that's where you'll experience it. So I encourage you to expect to see God more. Expect to feel God more. Expect that the Guru is with you. Expect that your life is being guided. Expect every positive potential, and you'll experience more of it. And then as we open ourselves up to that expectation, invite the Guru to guide your expectations. Invite the Guru to give them to him. Make an offering of those expectations. And say, Lord, I give you freely my attention. And I trust your guiding presence in my life. And in that relationship, you have the best of both worlds. You have the freedom of surrender, and you have the guiding of your inner energies in the most positive directions, your openness to all of those potentials. So, get real in God. Namaste.